Welcome back, listeners, to another episode of The Snake Pit. I'm your host, Son of Bat, and today I'm going to be doing the unthinkable. I'm going to review a Marvel movie. Yeah, I know, it doesn't sound like it would fit this channel. Normally I wouldn't, but for some reason I just felt the need to review this movie. It's not Blade, even though that would fit the channel perfectly because it is a vampire flick, and I do love all three of those movies. I don't know, maybe I'll do those in a trilogy video all at once or something, but I didn't think about that one. Instead, I chose my favorite superhero movie of all time and one of my favorite superhero characters of all time, The Punisher. Specifically the 2004 film, because that's the one I grew up with. There was a film released in 1989 with Dolph Lundgren called The Punisher, which is still pretty cool, and I recommend you check it out. But like I said, the 2004 one I grew up with. I've seen it at least 100 times. The special features, I think this is the DVD that got me into checking out special features on DVDs. And, this was definitely the first comic book movie I ever saw that I got references to. Like, when I saw Spider-Man and stuff when I was a kid, I didn't really get any of the references. I kind of just watched it as a movie, because I didn't really read a lot of Spider-Man, but I read a lot of Punisher comics when I was a kid. So when I watched this movie, I was like, oh, that's a reference from Warzone. That's a reference from War Journal. Like, this whole arc is from Welcome Back, Frank, which was coming out at the time of the movie and was a huge part of the video game. So this was one of the first comic book movies I actually felt like in on, like, the community, and like I knew what was going on. So that was really cool. And basically I think how I picked this movie was I was trying to find something with a really kick-ass metal soundtrack, and I was going through some horror movies. Originally I was going to pick Freddy vs. Jason, but I remembered I'm doing the Friday the 13th series, and I didn't want to jump ahead and do that one and fuck the whole thing up. So I was like, okay, maybe I'll do Shocker. And then it was like, oh, it's like 2 hours and a few minutes, and it's like already 12 a.m. and I'm like, I don't want to stay up that late. And then I just picked The Punisher, but stupid me, fucking the movie The Punisher is like only 3 minutes shorter than Shocker, so I was like, I could have picked either. But I'm not disappointed I picked this one, because like I said, I've seen it hundreds of times and I still like it as much as I did when I was a kid. Maybe not as much, but I still like it a lot. It went by rather fast, and it was just super enjoyable, and it just made me want to play the video game, which got on Xbox still. I used to have it on PS2, but I'll save that story for later because it's a pretty fucking funny one. But this movie was a huge part of my life, and I remember as a kid, every kid wants to be a superhero. Like, you got kids who want to be Spider-Man, Iron Man, and all that stuff. But I remember when I was a kid, I wanted nothing more than my family to get wiped out in a gunfight, only for me to come back and avenge their deaths and take out every crime family in the world. No, I'm fucking around. But seriously, I did want to be the Punisher when I was a kid. I just thought he was one of the only superheroes that kind of makes sense, and still only makes sense to me, because like Batman will beat someone within the inch of their life, and then they'll go to jail, and then as crooked as Arkham is and Gotham is, they'll just let them out and they'll go do the same shit over again. Punisher just puts a bullet in their head. They don't come back. And it's just, he's a wild hero. I remember the comics that really like showed me how far superhero comics could go, because these were coming out at the time when I was a kid, was the Punisher Max. I think these were coming out a year after the movie in 2005. I could be wrong, but I had a couple of those growing up because my dad was into the Punisher, so he'd get a few comics for me, even the like the hard R Max ones. And yeah, man, like brutal shit, and fucking made me love these comics even more. I think that was my first experience of hardcore violence was in those comics. So this series really did open a lot of doors to the person I am today. So, maybe it does fit on the channel here. But before I go into like, how much I love this movie and all like the little details and stuff, I'm just going to graze over the plot here. The Punisher is a vigilante action film directed by Jonathan Hensleigh, written by Michael France and Jonathan Hensleigh, based on The Punisher by Gary Conway, Ross Andrew, and John Romita Sr., produced by Avi Arad and Gail Ann Hurd, starring Thomas Jane, John Travolta, Will Patton, Roy Schneider, Laura Herring, Ben Foster, and Rebecca Romaine. Cinematography by Conrad W. Hall, edited by Stephen Kemper and Jeff Gulo. Music by Carlo Silito. Production companies Lionsgate Films and Marvel Entertainment, distributed by Lionsgate Films, and released on April 16, 2004 on a budget of $33 million with a box office return of $54.7 million. So it made a decent amount of money, but it didn't make a lot of money. I think maybe it had something to do with the fact that Marvel is well, nowadays is a very family oriented company, like especially because they're bought by Disney. And even when the show The Punisher came out, that was one of the first things they pulled, because I guess it clashes with the family friendly image, and the Punisher isn't a conventional superhero, and not many parents, I guess, would take their kids to see this movie. However, I was lucky enough to have parents who weren't pussies when it came to action movies and shit like that. So, seeing The Punisher wasn't a problem for me. And the interesting thing about this movie, before I get into the plot, was I saw Mad Max around the same time I saw The Punisher, and this movie, this adaptation of The Punisher's origin, at least, is like heavily inspired by Mad Max. Get more into that in a minute. But another interesting thing I found was this is the last film to be actually theatrically produced by Artisan Entertainment. And if you don't know, originally they were Live Entertainment, where they released movies like Reservoir Dogs, Bad Lieutenant, and Wishmaster. But when they were Artisan Entertainment, they did a whole bunch of different movies covering a whole wide range of genres, such as like Pi, Strangeland, I believe Van Wilder, at least the first one, The Blair Witch Project 1 and 2, The Ninth Gate, Stir of Echoes, Candyman 3, The Limey, Way of the Gun, a lot of different stuff, like, Jonah, the Veggie Tales story. I'm not fucking around about that. They actually released that one, and then Requiem for a Dream. So a whole wide span of movies, but I thought it'd be interesting to note that this was one of the last movies by them. So cool little fact I threw in there, I guess. And without further ado, I guess I'll talk about the plot. I'm not really into comics, so I might be missing a couple things here, and it's all good, whatever. I'm just going to graze over this lightly. But those of you who know the Punisher's origin story know that Frank Castle is a Vietnam veteran whose family gets killed by the mob. This happens in New York City. There's only slight changes with the story here. This takes place in Tampa primarily, and Frank Castle isn't a Vietnam veteran. I think he's a Gulf War veteran, but he's primarily an FBI agent and counterterrorism agent. But other than that, the story is pretty much the same, if not a little bit more brutal in some respects, but we'll get to that. Essentially, the whole movie kicks off with an arms deal between Bobby Saint and Mickey Duca. They meet this guy named Otto Krieg. I think he's this like German dude who's going to sell them like MP5s or some shit. But right as the deal is about to go down, they get cornered by the FBI. Otto Krieg is seemingly murdered. This whole shootout breaks out where Bobby Saint ends up getting killed. Duca gets arrested and taken away, and we come to find out Frank Castle is actually Otto Krieg. He wasn't actually killed. It was blanks and blood packs. We get some emotional depth to the Punisher in this, because this is the origin story, so we get to see what Frank Castle was like before he went hardcore fucking murder machine mode. But essentially, he shows remorse for the fact that Bobby Saint got killed. He didn't want it to go down like that, but the job's the job. He eventually goes home where his wife and son are packing up. This seems to be something that happens a lot, because he's got to move from place to place after like these undercover missions, and his son's obviously upset about it, but he promises him that soon, once they get to London, it'll be the last time they move and everything will be fine and they'll be able to chill as a proper family. And then before all of this happens, they got to go to Puerto Rico because there's a giant family get-together. Now, simultaneously with the family get-together, the Castle family, the Saint family is holding a funeral for Bobby. There we're introduced to Howard Saint, who's played by John Travolta. We're introduced to Bobby Saint's twin brother, John, and Livia, who's the mother. And then also right-hand man Quentin Glass and some of the other thugs who are going to be cannon fodder later. And the interesting thing I thought, because I saw this around the same time as Spider-Man and some of the other Marvel movies, obviously it's not the same place, but the cemetery shot looks pretty similar to fucking Spider-Man. So I always thought it was funny that the Saint funeral's going on when like the fucking the funeral for Green Goblin's going on or some shit. You know what I mean? Only in Marvel would something like that happen. And I mean, in the video game, crossover shit like that just randomly happens. So maybe it's not too far-fetched. But essentially at the funeral, Livia tells Quentin that she wants, as retribution for her son's death, she wants the whole family, the whole Castle family, to get wiped out. So when they're all at Puerto Rico, Saint's goons ambush the family, and he kills all of them. Men, women, and children. Everyone gets murdered. Like, at least 40 people get fucking mowed down in the middle of the day. It is fucking brutal. I believe this movie was going to get an X rating for multiple things, and I think the family massacre might have had something to do with this too. Like, there is some violence in this movie. This is not your fucking typical Marvel movie, and I love it because of that. It is just so brutal. Like, in the comic books, it's still fucked up. I mean, it's him and his wife and kids all get shot the fuck up, but in this, it's like the whole Castle family tree gets wiped out. Oh, shit, I forgot to mention this. We also get a brief glimpse at the soon-to-be worn Punisher uniform, the t-shirt with the skull on it. However, the difference between the movie and the comic books is we never really get a definition as to what the skull or why he chose the skull shirt. I mean, I could be wrong. It's been a while since I read some of the comics, but it's kind of just his uniform. There's no really in-depth explanation for it. It's kind of self-explanatory, but in this, the kid tells him he picked up the shirt for his dad as a gift, and the guy at the local store told him it wards off evil spirits. And yeah, so there's our explanation for the Punisher shirt in this. I mean, it's whatever. It's not the worst origin to a uniform. Like, you know, his kid gave it to him. That explains why he wears it. But I don't know, man. I don't really need the explanation. It's just a badass shirt. But, you know, it just represents death to the people who are going to fucking run into the Punisher. But anyway, after the family massacre, Frank is mortally wounded. And it's crazy because it's almost like I said, I saw Mad Max around the same time as I saw this movie when I was a kid. And I don't know how my fucking little child monkey brain didn't put this together and make the connection, but the scene when Frank's wife and son get murdered is almost shot for shot with the scene of Max's family getting run down in the first movie. And maybe the reason why I like this movie so much is because, aside from my bias to like the Punisher and the comics, fucking Mad Max is one of my favorite action movies of all time, and, you know, one of my favorite grindhouse movies of all time. So maybe that has to do with this, but pretty cool because it lines up. And even the Punisher's car later in the movie almost looks like the Interceptor that Max drives in the first movie. So pretty cool coincidence there. But yeah, heavy Mad Max inspirations. Gotta love it. His family gets fucking destroyed. He gets, they think they kill him in a gas explosion, but he drifts away, and then the local witch doctor basically heals him, to which he goes back, gets some guns and stuff a few months later, and returns swearing vengeance, and that God's going to sit this one out, and he's going to kill everyone involved. Basically, when Frank Castle goes back to Tampa, there's a whole string of events that go down. He gets an apartment, and in the apartment, we're introduced to Joan, Bumpo, and Spacker Dave. These are all characters that show up in the Welcome Back Frank arc in the comic books that were released in about, I think, 2000 or 2001. You'll find a lot of characters from this arc actually show up here, such as the Russian, but still really cool. I mean, again, this was something that when I was a kid, it kind of confused me because I wasn't really adept at comics. And again, I was still a little kid. I didn't realize how all these references and shit worked. I just noticed familiarities from what I was reading and what I was playing in the game, and I kind of was like screwing with my head how the timeline of this worked, but it was cool catching references like that. And basically, the Punisher starts doing reconnaissance to slowly take down the family, but he makes it known that he's back by taking out the tombstone, scratching off the death date, and leaving it at the golf course for Howard Saint to find. This honestly shakes up the whole criminal organization that are there, but, you know, fuck it, it's coming. And, you know, while Frank's there, he's fixing up his car and he's getting his armory ready. A lot of fucking badass shit with guns and cars, fucking metal music, kick-ass. And as you'd expect in this story, law enforcement is of no help because the Saint influence on Tampa is so strong that nobody's been arrested after this mass family massacre happened, which is fucking insane, but it makes sense for a comic book movie. The way Frank actually goes about getting information in this one's pretty cool because this is a reference to the Punisher Warzone issue 1, where he strings up Mickey Duca, who's like the biggest pussy out of all of the Saint henchmen, and he basically interrogates him by telling him that if he cooks him with a blowtorch, he's going to go into shock and all he'll feel is cold. So he burns a steak so that simulates the smell of meat, and then keeps poking him with a popsicle. And that was another reference I remember because I think I was reading the comic while I was watching the movie, and I was like, oh shit, this is going on right here. And yeah, just more cool references in this movie that I just fucking love. You know, once the Punisher gets his information, he studies the family and learns their every move. He discovers that Glass, the right-hand man, is a closeted homosexual and a sadist. He attacks the Saint business and the partnership with the Cubans by destroying like cash shipments. He actually goes to one of these buildings and he takes a bunch of the laundered money, gets the guys to cut a hole in the glass, and then they throw it all out, makes it rain cash. He ends up killing 2 of the henchmen involved in the family massacre, and this just keeps going on until the Saint starts sending assassins back at him. The first one is Harry Heck, who shows up in actually again the Welcome Back Frank arc, but in that one he is killed really fast and he's portrayed more as a redneck, and it's like almost comedic how fast he's there because he doesn't get to do shit in the comic, he just gets murdered. However, in this, he's more like a Memphis Johnny Cash type, and he sings this song and then tells him that he's going to play it at his funeral. Wicked car chase and fucking gunfight pursues, and fucking, the cars flip over, and there's this great one-liner about how the Punisher's out there with a knife, and the guy's like, "You are one dumb son of a bitch. Bring a knife to a gunfight." And then he just shoots the ballistic blade right into Harry's fucking throat. It's just brutal, fucking wild shit. And then the next assassin they send is the Russian, who again shows up in the Welcome Back Frank story. I'm bringing that up a lot. He also shows up in the video game, and scared the shit out of me in the video game. I'm not gonna lie, as a kid, that was one of the biggest fears of me as a kid, was the Russian coming, breaking into my door and fucking destroying me and curb stomping my head. But yeah, scary motherfucker. The Punisher nearly gets killed in his own apartment, but he has the whole thing rigged up with booby traps, like guns and shit. There's this really funny scene where he pulls like a 44 on him, and the Russian just gets a dumbbell and crushes the fucking barrel of the gun. But eventually what happens is they smash through one of the walls and they land into Bumpo's apartment, where he happens to be making iced Florentine, and the Punisher grabs it, whips it in the Russian's face, sends him down the stairs. And then the next scene that happens is, it's pretty fucking brutal. I think this is one of the most brutal things I saw when I was a kid at the time. It was up there with the Reservoir Dog ear slice, but they hide the Punisher because more goons are coming and he's too hurt to like deal with it, so they put him in an elevator under the apartment, and only Bumpo and Dave remain while Joan treats his injuries. And they keep inquiring, where's the Punisher? Now this is where the sadist part of Glass comes out. He starts like admiring Dave's piercings, and he ends up pulling them all out with pliers. Dave doesn't crack, doesn't say anything. They leave one guard there. The Punisher takes one of those like paper cutter blades off and buries it into his head, and then suits up and gets ready to go and kill the last of the Saints. But before he does that, he's had a plan this whole time where he's been making it look like Glass and Livia have been having an affair to get Howard to like not only not trust his business but not trust his wife, which it works. Like John Travolta buys it hook, line, and sinker. He ends up killing Glass in a Jim Bowie knife fight, which is pretty epic. And then he kills Livia by throwing her off a train track. And it's weird because in the comic book we get some different scenes. Like I remember I had the movie adaptation, it's like 3 issues or something, but there's some differences. Like one of the main guys, like one of Frank's FBI friends, he actually gets brought, I think his name's Sims or something, he gets brought up again, and he's supposed to be one of Frank's friends, but he doesn't help stop the Saints or anything. And then when Frank Castle turns to the Punisher and questions him about it, he finds out that this dude had a fucking gambling debt, and the Saints used it against him to get information on Frank, and eventually he backstabbed him. So Frank gives him a gun and makes him kill himself, and the studio, I guess, deemed that to be too dark, so that wasn't in there. But I thought it would have been interesting to have that there to show that even the people that were his friends didn't really give a shit at the end of the day, or couldn't do anything, because it just felt kind of weird, like I was saying, like that this huge family massacre happened and not a single person got arrested. I believe also Livia's death, like in the movie originally they were supposed to make it a suicide, but then they made it that Howard throws her off the bridge and she gets hit by a train. Funny play of words there, because if I remember the comic book correctly, it's the Cubans that abduct Livia and they throw her in an alley and she gets like gang raped or something, or it's implied she gets gang raped or some shit, like a train ran on her. So I don't remember. I got to get that comic again and look it over, but I swear to God, there's some really twisted shit that gets implied in the comic. Essentially, Howard Saint, now that he's all broken and paranoid and alone and only has his remaining son left, he puts up a bounty for, I believe, $50,000 to everyone involved in killing him, and then an additional $50 for everyone who kills him, being the Punisher. Frank shows up fucking with a compound bow, puts arrows through motherfuckers' necks. He starts blasting people. Like, he puts a claymore up in a fucking champagne lift, blows the whole room up, walks upstairs, shoots the shit out of everyone. One of the main guys he got into a fight with earlier at the beginning of the movie buries a knife into the guy's fucking hand, through his fucking hand to his thigh, and then puts another knife through his chin up into his head, which you can do in the video game, which is really cool. But yeah, brutal fucking gunfight. It could have been way more brutal, but again, they didn't want to give the movie an X rating or an NC-17, so they toned it the way the fuck down, which is pretty fucking stupid, because if you read the Max comics that came out later, those are X-rated by comparison to this movie. Like, this movie, oh man, if it went as hard as those comics, it would have been so crazy. But this results in, yeah, everyone getting fucked up. John Saint's there with his arm outstretched, so the Punisher puts a claymore in it, and he tells him, like, it's 8 pounds, but it's going to be pretty heavy with an outstretched arm. And then Howard Saint, like, limping out, looking completely fucked up and destroyed. Because throughout the whole movie, John Travolta looks like, you know, like a boss, like John Travolta. He's, like, all put together and shit. But by the end of the movie, he looks like a nut, bro, like a disheveled lunatic. And the Punisher reveals, he's like, I made you kill your wife. I made you kill your best friend. And he's like, you killed my son. And then the Punisher's like, both of them, and all you hear in the background is just and then an explosion. Super cool. He fucking has this elaborate explosion set up after Howard's rigged to the car and lit on fire, that every car explodes and makes the Punisher skull. And he leaves Joan, Bumpo, and Dave with a bunch of cash, presumably disappears, and this is when he officially takes up the mantle as the Punisher, where he gives his Kree out to psychos, rapists, and everyone out there that they can call him the Punisher, and that he's sure to come and fuck their shit up. And goddamn, man, like, watching this movie, it took me back to my childhood days. Like, I was so fucking amped after I watched this. Like, it made me want to play the game, which I've also sunk hundreds of hours into. But like I was saying, this DVD's got some really killer special features on it. Specifically, one of them is called Army of One: The Punisher Origins. And this was really cool because, like, there's a lot of interviews with Garth Ennis, and they talk about the background and the evolution of the Punisher, and how Marvel always, like, never really liked the Punisher because he was too violent and couldn't fit the brackets of fucking superheroes, but how he's still one of the best superheroes they ever created. They mentioned his crossovers with Spider-Man back in the day, how he originally wanted to kill Spider-Man but became friends with him, and it was all because of this fucker, the Jackal. Really good history to the Punisher, and, like, you get to see some cool stills from comic books, like, just really cool. Then there was also, like, you know, a music video for Step Up by Drowning Pool, which metal music videos are always fucking cool here. There's a sneak peek trailer to the Punisher game, which I remember when I saw this, the instant I saw it, I was like, I need this game. I need to play this fucking game, because I think the only superhero game I had at that point was, like, Spider-Man 2, which was, don't get me wrong, a banger fucking game, but this was like the perfect workaround, because this was an M-rated game, but it was a Marvel superhero game. So, you know, there was at least one parent out of both of mine that would probably crack and pick this one up if we found it. And sure enough, I remember I was in a pawn shop one day with my dad, and we saw it, and, like, because he is a huge fan of the movie, and, like, when we used to go to comic conventions when I was a kid, he used to buy Punisher comics almost the same as I would, Punisher and Spawn. So I remember once we saw the game, he was like, he looked at it and he, like, was like, I'll get it, but you can't show your mom this. And I'm like, all right, bet. So, you know, I played the shit out of this game on PS2 when I was a kid, and eventually it disappeared. More on that in the next video, but then I ended up getting it again on Xbox. I fucking beat the shit out of this game, and yeah, it's just amazing, like, super cool. And you know, there's another one called Drawing Blood, Bradstreet style, where you get to see, like, how Tim Bradstreet got to make the covers for a lot of the Max Edition comics, which are super awesome. I highly recommend you check those out. To be honest with me, the Punisher, every run of it I've pretty much enjoyed. Even the Cosmic Ghost Rider run, which, I mean, I don't like Disney Marvel shit, but I will give them this one tiny 50-cent comic issue the fucking credit, because it was a cool story. Even the fucking Archangel Punisher fucking, like, death thing was pretty cool. Like, I don't know, man. I'm not big on superhero comics, but when it comes to the Punisher, I geek the fuck out, man. Like, I don't know. I've never seen a superhero, except for maybe the Mask, just straight up blow somebody's fucking head off, and goddamn, he's a cool superhero. And it's a shame that it's so, like, this is one of those movies that Marvel just keeps pushing in the back burner. Like I said, there's only, I think, 3 movies in the TV show. Originally, there was supposed to be a second movie called The Punisher 2 with Thomas Jane, but due to creative differences, he didn't show up, and it ended up being a reboot in 2008 called Warzone, which it's not horrible. I need to get a copy of it because I haven't seen it in years. But like out of the three Punisher movies, the 89 one, the 04 one, and Warzone, I'd say that Warzone's my least favorite out of the three. I mean, it's got a kick-ass soundtrack and a unique visual style, but maybe I got to rewatch it again. I don't know 100%, but I remember I did not like it as much as the first two, but maybe that's just me. Maybe it's because, like I said, I got a bias to Mad Max shit, and this movie borrows heavily, with the fucking vehicles, the sawed-off shotguns. But yeah, I don't know. I fucking love this movie. It is a really good action movie. It's not the greatest thing ever, you know what I mean? It's a comic book movie, so it's a little corny here and there, especially because it's early 2000s Marvel. But I don't know. I think that's what made, I could be wrong. Maybe I'm just jaded or whatever, but I think what made the original Marvel movies so good was they felt like actual comic books. They didn't just feel like spectacles. Like you didn't go because like, oh, the special effects. You went because these were good comic book adaptation movies. Like even the ones that weren't as great, like, Daredevil, like that was good if you saw the director's cut, in my opinion. Like, fucking the Hulk was like pretty decent. Like Spider-Man, those were all good movies, and they didn't need an extended universe, and they didn't need to cross over into each other's movies. They just put one out, and if it was good, hey man, it was fucking good. And I miss that. Like I don't like that. Like with comic book movies now, you have to watch them like in a specific order, and you have to watch all of them. Like that's what I kind of didn't like about the Punisher show too. Like they're lucky because Daredevil was such a good fucking show that I didn't mind watching both Daredevil and Punisher. But like once they started tying in like Luke Cage and fucking Iron Fister or whatever, and fucking whatever the chick Jessica Jones, like whatever like Jessica Jones, I think the chick whose superpower is that she gets raped or whatever, I don't know. Like once it made it like, oh, you gotta watch all these connect, I kind of like zone out. Sometimes I want to watch one isolated movie by itself, and this one's perfect because it packs so much reference into one thing. It doesn't need a sequel per se. Like it's pretty cool as a standalone. And to be honest, I consider the video game more of a sequel anyway, even though that differs completely from the movie. But I fucking love this movie. It is really cool. If you like Mad Max, you're going to like this movie. If you like fucking R-rated superhero comic book movies, you're going to like this movie. If you like action movies, you're going to like this movie. If you like kind of corny action movies with some comedy and some 2000s metal, you're going to like this movie. I mean, I don't know what else I could do to sell you. I hope if you check this out, you enjoyed it as much as me. It's just a fun ride. Don't expect anything too super deep. Just it's a popcorn movie. It's a great summer shoot 'em up flick. I think that it fits this channel personally because this could have gotten an X rating for so many of the scenes. Like this is a very, very violent and some would say unusual departure for Marvel, but it's fucking cool. I love it. Like for that, this is also why Blade is fucking amazing. But yeah, man, check this movie out if you haven't. It's pretty enjoyable. Also check out the 89 version. Might review that at some point too. But Punisher 2004, if I would to rate this on a scale, I'd probably give it probably going to give it a 10. That's my own personal bias. I just love this movie so much. It's just really cool. I think it may have opened the doors to like, fucking more crazy shit, but it's cool, man. The Punisher is awesome. It's always a fun read, always fun watching the movie. It's always fun playing the video game. So check this out. Don't forget to like, comment, subscribe. Hope you guys enjoyed this episode. Peace.